basics in place, let's start to look at the whole of the dinosaur now and the proportions. To start with, I'm going to enable symmetry across the Z-axis to complete our dinosaur model, as we only currently have half. So to do this, I'm going to go up to the symmetry option here and make sure that the symmetry is on. We can choose symmetry here. I've docked this window down here, so I've got access to it and can turn on and off at will. So here I'm going to click on the Z-axis, and you can see that I've got this preview of the dinosaur. Now the reason it's like this is because under mesh options here, I've got the virtual mirror turned on, and as the name implies, this is only a representation of what the whole model will look like should I decide to apply the symmetry and create geometry using this option here. For now, I'm going to leave the virtual mirror mode on and evaluate the mesh to see where I need to edit the proportions. So I've included the reference down here in this lower corner, and now I can have a look and just evaluate the model. And we can see straight off the bat that it's quite wide in the torso area here. The feet aren't too bad. They kind of work reasonably well. I think the hands and arm positions could be a little bit closer together as well. And also the head is too wide in this section here and causing the jaw actually to look a little bit too narrow. So let's start to make some edits proportionally. Now I've only got the side reference, as we remember, so I'm just going to eyeball the proportions just based on other images and movies, etc. that I've seen of these dinosaurs, and just work from those visual library references. So in 3DCoat, we've got a couple of options that we can choose. One of the quick ways to make proportional edits is by using the brush tool here under tweak. The brush tool has this radii around it. If I use the mouse wheel, then this will increase the influence of the move that I make. So if I have a small radius on here and start to move, it's only going to have a small impact on that mesh. If I increase the radius and push inwards, then I'm going to have a much larger influence. So here, for example, on the neck, where it seems as if it's fairly squarish now, I can start to push this one inwards to round out that neck shape a little bit more. These aren't large movements that I'm doing here. I'm just doing small bits at a time and just reassessing every time to check as I go. And if I want a more localized movement, I will reduce the size of that radii like so. The next option that I've got is to use select. And in this case, I'm going to use points. And here I can brush select some of these to move. So let's say, for example, on the arms here, I can brush select these points around here. I can then go ahead and use the expand and contract to increase those areas as well. So here, for example, I want to get as much of this in as I can. So maybe it's a little bit too much. Maybe that's okay there. And then I can use spacebar, transform, and use the gizmo to push these points in and out. But that's not all. I've also got the ability here to use smooth selection. So we've already selected these points, and now I can go ahead now and start to smooth that selection out. And you can see that it's slowly starting to increase its area of influence and have a soft transition to those main points that I initially selected here. So now I can go in and I could move this whole section, and you can see the virtual mirror updating at the same time. Now I need to be a little bit more careful with this before I actually commit any movements. So I need to make sure that I select the rest of the arm here. So there's a number of ways I could do that. I could use the lasso tool or a marquee like this and select around, make sure all those are selected. Sometimes it may be worth just deselecting any stray points like those just before you start to expand that selection. And it's a good idea to have these on a keyboard shortcut, as you can see here, mine are set up for page up and page down for expansion and contraction of the selected, in this case, points. By changing over to more of a brush, then I can then hold shift and continue selecting like so. And if I've got any stray points, holding down control and deselecting any points that I think are too excessive. And let's just finish off and just select those ones there. At any point, if I want to come back to this, I can save my selection here if I need to do further edits. But for now, I'm just going to use smooth selection just to smooth this out. And then I'll choose transform, hold shift to move the gizmo roughly where in the middle of that arm. And then I can just start to push those in. Obviously at this point, if I want to rotate that selection, I could do the same with that as well. And Control D to drop the selection. So that brings those two front arms closer together. And you probably noticed as I was pushing those in that we had some compression on these polygons that actually works quite well, because on the reference it seems as if we've got very loose skin underneath here, and this is giving me that impression that the skin underneath the neck and the chest area here is compressed and loose, and that's just a happy accident. So I've gone back to using the brush tool now, as it's my preferred method of making these sort of edits, and I've increased the brush size, so this has increased the fall off level, similar to using that smooth selection that we did in the previous technique. So now I'm going to just make these edits where I assess and evaluate the model, making sure that it keeps it a relatively slim profile. We don't want the dinosaur to look too heavy, as it was a fast moving creature. It's not going to be carrying a lot of bulk, so we do need to slim it down a little bit. Here you can see that based on those movements that I've just made, I've split the actual mirrored geometry. That's no problem, because all I need to do is just push it closer to the center line, and then 3DCoat will weld those pieces together. But remember, at the moment, this is not actual geometry on this side of our model, but it will help if everything is aligned up, and we'll save a few steps later in the process. So we can just apply some hip as well as a spine here on the back. And of course, when we increase the resolution of this model, then we'll get a lot more geometry to play with. But for now, we're just blocking in just to prepare for those next stages. And you'll notice that if I move over to the mirrored side of this model, the cursor actually disappears, which reinforces that this is not real geometry here. It's only there for visual representation. So here I've gone ahead and I've selected this eye socket here. And if we look at the top view, we can see that the head is quite large and wide in this section here, and the eyes are quite far apart. So I need to correct this. So I'm going to choose transform, and with smooth select on, I'm going to just push this geometry inwards slightly here. This defines the brow a little bit more as well. Just maybe rotate this around a little bit, drop that selection, and here I'm going to have to make some more local edits here with the brush tool, reducing that brush size and just pulling a little bit of this geometry out. I'm not adding any geometry in here. All I'm doing is just moving these verts around and just doing a little reshape as I go. So I'm only using this as my reference. I'm not using any other reference for this, which isn't a good practice. You should really be find more images on the internet or wherever for front and top views, and that will help you to make more informed decisions as you're making these sort of proportional edits. And I'm just going to push this in underneath here and just pull this jaw out, because they've got powerful jaws and we need to show that there's a lot of structure under here for a powerful bite from this dinosaur. And let's look at the top of the head here and just have a look at this section here. Let's push this one over just to seal that up. It needs to come in a little bit more here. And just show a little bit more skull or bone underneath that skin. Again, a little bit more of a local edit, reducing the size of that brush. And we can just move this up, I think, a little bit more. And I'm going to do a little bit more of a local edit here on this brow, which makes it feel a lot more fierce when this brow is quite prominent, as it is here on this top section. But this kind of detail we can add later down the line. For now, that gives us a good foundation. Okay, so let's say that our model is now finished and we are happy with this low polygon asset as it stands. Now we have to commit the mirrored side of this object to form the dinosaur. To do that, we're going to go over to Mesh, and with the virtual mirror still on, as we can see in the preview, I'm going to say apply symmetry to current layer. Now when I do that, it seems as if nothing's happened, and the reason for this is because virtual mirror is still on. It doesn't deactivate when you apply. So once I deactivate the mirror there, then you can see there is the new geometry, and it's become a solid color now as opposed to that transparent color that we saw with the virtual mirror on. So here we've got our model and it's all welded together. Now I've still got my symmetry on here in the Z axis, so if I move anything on one side, it's going to still allow me to move the newly mirrored geometry over. So I've still not lost that capacity to mirror both, to work on both sides at the same time. And as you can see down here, it says perfect symmetry between those two sides. So now I have my low poly asset ready. So one thing I'm going to do now is go to my polygroups here where it says body. This layer here called body contains all of the polygons that we've just been creating. And what I want to do is I want to save this version of this model. So I'm going to click on these little six dots that you can see at the end of this layer, and my cursor changes, and I'm going to drag this over into this folder that I've prepared, and this preserves a copy of this inside this folder. Now if I just create a new layer here, and let's hide the original one, and I click on this preserved copy, you can see it brings it back and asks me to position. The position that it comes in automatically was the position it was in when I dragged that body layer down into this folder. So polymodels are a very good way of preserving progression of your model, as well as being able to go back to a previous version whenever you need maybe, for example, a really low polygon object in the future. So I'm just going to escape that, delete that extra layer that I made, and bring back my original one here. The polygons tab down here is actually quite a powerful tool, and the reason for this is we can create modular assets from the first model that we use. So to do this, what I'm going to do is take this original body layer and I'm going to duplicate it and say apply. I'm going to hide my original, and I'm just going to use this copy just to show an example of what I mean. So let's say, for example, that I have a range of dinosaurs that have different legs and different arms. So here I've selected the edges around this arm detail, and if I choose split edge from here, you can see that it separates that out. Now this becomes its own object at this point, and I can go back to my select polygons to select all those polygons, and then I can create a new layer, and with those selected I can transfer those polys that make up that arm to this new layer. And now I have detached the arm from this particular model. And what I can do here is give this one a new name. I could whatever type of dinosaur this one was, and I can drag this now into my folder. And I can do the same with the legs, with the head, or go a little bit more granular and change hand types and feet types. And as long as I remember the number of vertices around the edge here and match that accordingly, then I can swap and change these limbs over and create variations. I can get quite a lot of mileage out of this initial work that I've done and create a library of assets which fit in a modular way to this mesh. So here, for example, I have my duplicated dinosaur mesh, and here I have an arm that I've created as a modular piece for this particular dinosaur. If I say OK, and you can see that this has a sword in the arm, and what I can do here is just click on these arrows and drop it back onto the body, the duplicated body layer. Select the move tool with points selected and just snap some of these points. And there we have our newly designed modular arm attached to our dinosaur. So if you imagine having a long list of these different items, leg shapes, even torso shapes, head shapes that we could have in our folder, this gives us a lot of flexibility in designing a range of dinosaurs for our game or our project. In the next video, we'll return to using curves to add extra details to our model. See you next time.